Hello, everybody. This is Howie Hawkins, the Green Party candidate for president, with Angela Walker, the next vice president of the United States. And the first thing we got to talk about is the loss of Kevin Zeese, who passed away Sunday morning, unexpected. And he leaves a giant hole, not only in our campaign, but the whole progressive movement, the peace movement, the movement for drug policy reform, movement for climate justice and global justice. And Kevin, if you didn't know him, he was prolific. He put out a daily news and opinion summary called Popular Resistance with his partner, Margaret Flowers. Put out a column every week, did a radio broadcast called Clearing the Fog that Many Pacifica and other stations covered. And he did all that as well as write a stream of op-eds and journal articles. And he did all that while being my press secretary without skipping a beat. And of course, we miss him. He was relentless in the pursuit, not just of getting the word out, but he was a very serious activist. He was the guy, along with Margaret, that first called for what we now call Occupy. They called for Occupy in Freedom Square in Washington, D.C. in spring of 2011. And they called for October 1st. The Adbusters call to go to Wall Street a couple of weeks earlier came much later. And I think the target was right. The government can do something about the banks. You can protest the banks, but they can ignore us. So I think that was, indicative of how astute and prescient he was about where the movement is going. And his commitment, I think, was illustrated by the fact that he and Margaret stayed to the very end protecting the embassy of Venezuela in Washington, D.C. against the representatives of Juan Guaido, who the United States wants to impose on Venezuela, and got arrested. They eventually got all the charges cleared, but he was in there for 37 days, stayed to the very end. They were one of the last 4 people out of dozens that were originally occupying. And that kind of tells us who Kevin was. And he was principled. I mean, he and I didn't agree on everything. We'd have some knockdown, drag out arguments, but I knew he was coming from the right place and he respected that I was too. So we could agree to disagree and still, learn from each other in these arguments. And that's a political skill I think we all should have. Some people thought Kevin was too blunt and didn't want to get into it with him, but I prefer to know where somebody's coming from and then deal with that. So I found that refreshing. And I was talking to Ralph Nader the next morning, and he said our society doesn't produce many people like Kevin Zeese. So that's what we got to report. And they will have a kind of a wake for him on September 19th. Our social media will make sure everybody knows when it is. And Angela, you want to speak to that as well?
Yeah, I just want to lift up the fact that when I first joined this campaign, he was one of the first people I met. And his sharpness and his bluntness, he didn't pull any punches, but he also listened to people. And you didn't have, like how he said, you didn't have to agree on every little thing. He was fair-minded and so smart. So he's not somebody, he's irreplaceable, and he is most definitely going to be missed. And we are, continually sending out love to Dr. Flowers, who is his partner, and to his family, and keeping them lifted, and holding them in love.
Yeah, so Kevin actually started the ball rolling in the Draft Howie movement while I was working 12-hour shifts at the post office, trying to make up a little bit for the cut in my multi-employer pension fund. The Teamsters New York Teamsters Conference pension fund. And that was bipartisan, and people can ask me how that happened, but my pension was cut. So I was trying to make up a little money after running for governor. And so I opened my email in January, and Kevin's got a whole little movement going. And I ended up accepting the draft. And I think one of the reasons Kevin did that is we agreed that we need a mass party of the people on the left in order to challenge this authoritarian duopoly that runs our country. Democrats are neoliberal, Republicans are now neo-fascist, which is to say the old-fashioned racism that for a long time was dominant in our government due to the Electoral College and the 3/5 clause, which became the 5/5 clause under Jim Crow, and overrepresented these races. And we still have that today with the Electoral College, black voter suppression, and the gerrymandering, particularly what the Republicans got done after the 2010 census. But if we're going to challenge that, we got to organize regular people. We can't build this around a few personalities. And so that's why we talk about being organizers and not just activists, not just going out and preaching, but going out and listening, not just mobilizing the usual suspects, but talking to the people that we need to get involved. That's the 100 million people that didn't vote in 2016. They're disgusted with the two parties. They're disproportionately working class people, people of color, and young people. And so, the point is, if we're going to have people's power, people got to act and speak for themselves. So that means organizing this party at the grassroots in every community. And when we go into communities that are not involved yet, we go in and listen and build relationships and trust and friendships. And then we can talk about the politics and agree to disagree on some things while we work on the things we agree upon. And so, Kevin brought that, and that's what we're trying to continue with his campaign. And so I hope people out there will take that to heart and do what they can during the campaign, but we will continue after the election along that vein. So with that, let's get some questions.
Jared Still is asking, will you guys try to work with For a People's Party following this election or continue to work independently?
Well, we're willing to work with anybody who's about a mass party, independent politics. We did have a discussion with Nick Brana, their leader, back in May. In fact, Kevin wrote him a proposal about how we could work together during this campaign and after, to which we've never received a response. The door's open at our end. I think, the problem is it's closed on their end. Brana did comment to people who asked why no Greens were speaking at his online convention recently. And he said the Greens are too left. And, that's unfortunate. I mean, as far as we're concerned, there's no particular litmus test as long as you're committed to independent people's politics, class independence from the two major parties, and you're for basic progressive values. So the door's open from our end. Child of Reason, Howie and Angela. What do you think of the idea of progressives reforming the Democratic Party from within?
Let's give them the most I will give you the most diplomatic answer that I am capable of. You're not going to reform the Democratic Party from within. As Howie says all the time, the Democratic Party is where progressives go to die. And I mean, we've seen it, in the way that Bernie Sanders was handled, in the fact that the Green New Deal that was being offered by the Democratic Party doesn't remotely resemble the full strength eco-socialist Green New Deal that they stole it from. And it was gutted to the point where it was meaningless and then pulled off the table completely. So if you are someone who is truly a progressive, the Democratic Party is not the place that you're trying to be. They don't respect that. Their corporate masters are not going to allow that. So you're not going to reform them from within, and it's completely by design. Mr. President?
There's a long history of people going in to reform the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party reforms them to conform to the Democratic Party. I mean, Bernie Sanders wouldn't have even got into the debates and on the ballots unless he had pledged loyalty to whoever won the nomination, which in 2015, he figured when he started would be Hillary Clinton. So he was pledging fealty to, Clinton neoliberalism from the start. And as Angela mentioned, the Green New Deal was the Green Party's signature issue in the 2010s. The Democrats took the slogan, diluted the content, and have now completely buried it. It was never mentioned during the Democratic convention. And the platform of the Democratic Party is worse on climate action and energy policy than it was in 2016. And that's after, 5 years of so many progressives saying, oh, we're going to get behind Bernie and we're going to elect all these progressives. Well, that hasn't happened. I think the lesson to learn from that is Bernie Sanders won when he ran as an independent to mayor of Burlington, Vermont, then to Congress, and then to the US Senate multiple times. When he ran as a Democrat, he lost. And it was clear this time he was in the lead, and all the rest of the candidates closed ranks behind Biden because that's what leadership said we got to do to stop Bernie. And Bernie then compromised on Medicare for all. He now says, I'll accept Medicare for all 55 and older. And below that, we keep the ACA private insurance with maybe a public option, which keeps the whole bureaucratic red tape system with all these multiple insurers that eats up 30% of our healthcare dollars. And so Bernie got changed by the Democratic Party. On the other hand, the Greens have elected Greens in 1,200 races over our history. There are over 100 in office right now. And the only thing we need to do is replicate that. We need to run a lot more candidates locally, and they'll start electing thousands as we go into the 2020s. And that's the foundation for state legislatures and Congress. We get a caucus of Greens in Congress, and then we run a ticket for president. Nobody will be able to ignore it. So we got to build it from the bottom up. It starts with those local races. And, you go into the Democratic Party and, you maybe support a progressive in the primary, but if you don't support the corporate candidate that won the primary, you're isolated, you're ostracized. You may recall that the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee said any political operative, consultant, candidate that challenges incumbent members of Congress as a progressive challenge will be ostracized. No business for them. They'll be off the list to be referred to for work on campaigns. That's how the power structure works there. So, you may go in as a progressive, but in the end, the power structure is with the corporate wing. And if you don't play ball with them, you're out. So you might as well get out and not compromise the politics and bring it right to the people, not try to go through the Democrats, which makes it a lot more complicated. And, I call it political ventriloquism. Progressives try to get these Democrats to say and do what we want them to. And it's not very effective because those politicians answer to their donors more than their voters, and even the activists that work on their campaigns. Arthur L. Vandelay. Why is the state of Alaska not recognizing the GPUS candidates Hawkins, Walker, and nominated Ventura as the Green POTUS candidate? Well, good question. Apparently, the Green Party of Alaska has been taken over by somebody who's not a Green, and has alienated and basically bullied other people in the Green Party of Alaska. So he unilaterally, we do not know, they supposedly had a poll on a couple of days before they had to file the paperwork. We don't know. There's been no report on who actually voted. They had a Zoom call on Sunday. I skimmed through it. I didn't see anybody from Alaska. I saw people from other parts of the country. And we don't know if Jesse Ventura has accepted. I mean, he's probably got to tell the state of Alaska. He said he was not running because his health insurance he gets through his program with RT is needed by his wife, who has an illness that I guess his VA benefits don't cover. So we're still trying to figure out what the hell happened in Alaska. We do know that a condition of affiliation with the National Green Party is that you put the nominees of the, for president and vice president of the National Convention on your ballot line. Since they haven't done that, they basically removed themselves from the Green Party, and the process to remove them is underway. So that's the best I can tell you what happened there. It's unfortunate because, our campaign laid out about $12,000 paying petitioners to get us on a ballot line up there, and handed the petitions over to the Green Party of Alaska. And this guy, then decided he's going to be a little petty power broker. And in the end, he may not have any candidate if Ventura doesn't accept. And I would bet Ventura doesn't, because, I take him at his word that it would jeopardize his health care. He's not running. At that Movement for a People's Party, when he spoke there, I don't know how exactly he phrased it, but he said he was supporting the Green Party. So that's the best I can tell you at this point.
Hey, JS236, how are you? Question: how would you work with the international community to provide a global solution for this global pandemic? I think one of the most important things we could do is look at best practices around the world. I mean, the example has been set by countries smaller than this one, with fewer resources, I would argue, in handling the pandemic in a very thoughtful and a very thorough way, making sure that, there was money available so that people were receiving an income and able to stay home or shelter in place, making sure that landlords were paid so that you didn't have them leaning on tenants and expecting rents. I think in some countries they had workers work, and you can correct me on this too, Howie, workers, I'm thinking of Norway, where workers, they reduced their hours, but they still kept them going. There's just a lot of things that we could have done as a country, looking at the way other countries move to intercept this virus and its fallout. And, this country chose not to do that. And so our administration has a plan for working, through the pandemic, which includes the things that I just mentioned. And also instituting a national test, trace, and isolate program. So we're able to, find out where the virus is happening and reduce do what we can to flatten the curve, but also make sure that people are supported while we are doing the work that we need to do for that. And so working with the international community, our administration would be exchanging best practices, I would think. But Mr. President, where are you at with that?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the Norway program. Germany has a program, maybe this is what Norway did too, where if you have to reduce hours, the government makes the difference up. Another thing some of these governments have done, and we kind of did with the payroll protection program, but in a half-assed and corrupt way, because a lot of that money didn't go where it was originally intended, is pay businesses their overhead and payroll costs so that people could stay attached to the workforce and to be on the payroll for the duration of the emergency. So when community spread and the infection rate is lowered enough that people can go back to work, they're ready to go. And these companies are still, not in debt from, not having revenue come in during when they were shut down, and the workers are not in debt either. So we can just get back in business, and that's definitely needed. And in terms of international cooperation, I think one thing is we need to learn from these other countries, because we're 4% of the world's population, a quarter of its deaths from COVID, and that's because most countries did do testing tracing and isolating the infected, so they, lowered community spread, and now they're going back to work and to school safely. And we're not doing that. So the first thing is, we need international cooperation so we can learn what the hell to do. Trump is probably incapable of that. He wants to get out of the World Health Organization. That's wrong. We should stay in because that's the UN organization that provides a lot of information and data on what's going on with the virus and recommendations on how to deal with it. And we should be a part of that. And then I think the other thing we can do is lift sanctions on these countries that are struggling with COVID, like Venezuela, or sanctions against Cuba, partly because they're trying to help other countries deal with the COVID epidemic with, medical people they've sent overseas. Italy is probably the most well-known example, but they've sent them to many countries. And the U.S. somehow thinks that's bad and it's a reason to put sanctions on them. And I think that's the opposite. You act aggressively with sanctions and threats of military action against countries that, may be authoritarian, but that just reinforces the narrative of the authoritarian government that we need to clamp down on people's rights domestically in order to fend off this foreign threat. So we actually reinforce authoritarianism with those kind of actions. So anyway, that's getting off COVID, but lift the sanctions and stay in World Health Organization. I think those are two immediate things our government should do. Rachel Mohan, the Green Party in my country appears to have all but lapsed and seems inactive. What is your advice regarding helping to revive a local party with an eye for the long term? And that was county. I'm sorry, not country. I was thinking, what country is that? Because Green parties are doing pretty well, especially in Europe in recent elections. Well, I think the first thing you do is find the people you can work with locally. And even if it's a small group, meet consistently, talk about what to do, and then recruit. And one piece of advice is don't recruit people to business meetings where you're debating bylaws or who we're going to put in the state committee or, kind of internal business. People don't join to, do bureaucratic kind of stuff or administrative kind of stuff. They join to take action and to learn. So, get new people involved in activities and in educational activities. So have speakers, do webinars, watch a film together, read a book or an essay together and discuss it. And, we need to be smart if we're going to beat this duopoly. And so that requires, us helping each other develop as thinkers and writers and speakers. So I think, you got to be in an organization and you start with who you got and find the people who have the energy. And another thing I would say is when you, go out and table or leaflet, really emphasize getting contact information of people that might be interested. Email, which is pretty much free, and phone numbers. And then stay in regular touch with them. You can send out emails and think you're not getting much of a response, but people are busy. They may be thinking about the Greens, maybe watching the Greens, but they certainly appreciate that you're paying attention to them and, or showing interest in them maybe getting involved. And in my experience, there'll be people that, aren't involved for a variety of reasons. Maybe they're finishing school or they have a young child and the child is now old enough that they have a little more time. They may have a better job, so they're not working two jobs, they're working one and getting by. And now they have time for the Green Party. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind. But the most important thing is, find a few people and just start working together and have an outreach plan. Get involved in community activities so people know you're there for them, whatever the issue is. I mean, Black Lives Matter is something going on in a lot of cities right now. There's always local issues from potholes to clean water to affordable housing. I mean, there's no problem with finding issues to get active on. And so that would be my advice. I guess the last thing I'd say is pace yourself. Budget how much time you can actually devote to it. Don't, like say, okay, now I got to devote everything and burn yourself out by just trying to do too much. Just let everybody find their own pace and then work together, and many hands make light work. So I think that's the way to look at it.
John Pell, or Pelly, excuse me if I'm butchering it. Are you a Christian, Howie or Angela? Well, I can speak for myself. I am a heathen. I support people's right to believe however they choose, whatever works for them. I have my own practice, and I do rock with liberation theology, though. So as far as Christianity goes, there are tenets of it that I personally agree with, but as far as being a Christian, no, I am not one.
Yeah, I'm not religious. I guess I'm what you call a secular humanist or atheist. But I do resonate with Christians, particularly those that, follow Christ in fighting for justice and treating people right. And, I have picked up from particularly Black ministers over the years who, trying to get me part of the flock. And they say, don't you understand? Jesus was a working class revolutionary that fought Roman imperialism. And I resonate with that. And so actually, I go to church sometimes, not because I'm religious, because I enjoy the fellowship. And, it's a social thing. So it's the best I can tell you. I'm just not a religious person. I kind of came up in the Sputnik era where, science and rationality were emphasized, and I still believe that. Yoandri Dominguez Garcia. Question. You support giving Hawaii independence? ? So we're only 49 states, or independence to Navajo Nation? I know it's out there and hard. I guess you mean a hard question to answer. And, I was actually talking with the Aloha Aina Party, a new party led by indigenous Hawaiians, who consider anybody living in Hawaii to be Hawaiian as citizens, if not by descent. And the way they put it is we have to make right what was wrong, what was done wrong, something like that. Because the U.S. annexed Hawaii in a very legally dubious way without the consent of the people of Hawaii. So they want to make it right. But they're not about just declaring independence while the economy is so dependent on tourism and the real estate industry and the military. So I think that's something Hawaiians need to work out for themselves. And as far as the Navajo Nation or other American Indian nations, most of them want to maintain their own sovereignty and jurisdiction on their own territory, but also be part of the United States. And I think, we can accept that. It's kind of a dual citizenship. But the bottom line is every people has a right to self-determination. And we have to respect what those people decide.
Brandon Rilling is asking, do you support free, trans, and non-binary surgeries? It's my understanding that those surgeries would be covered under Medicare for All as a community-controlled national health service. So, yes, I think people should have the right to live as who they are and not be, I know that there's a lot that happens with those surgeries and a lot of prejudice that people are met with. And so hopefully, we would have a system where people are able to have medical procedures that they need done without having to deal with prejudice. And Howie?
Yeah, the way we put it in the proposal is, all medically necessary services. And we do say that these procedures are medically necessary. So they would be covered.
pithy.
The Falcons General. The questions for Howie and Angela. Do you guys support the full decriminalization of sex work like the New England model?
New Zealand.
Why don't you elaborate, Angela?
We absolutely do support the decriminalization and legalization of sex work under the New Zealand model. And we have taken a lot of heat for it. And I have told people personally, I can't speak for Howie with this. This is me talking. This is a hill I will die on. I'm letting y'all know. Sex workers have the right to self-determination, and it is a proven fact under this model that respecting sex workers' agencies and empowering them to be able to choose their clients, to be able to choose how they're moving and how they're doing their transactions and things like that, without involving the police, without involving the state. It works. So, and a lot of people want to conflate, because I've seen it in the chat, conflating sex work with sex trafficking. And I need people to understand those are two very different things. They're two very different things. Every sex worker is not trafficked. And a lot of trafficking is not sex work. So I think that, my personal position has always been to respect the right of sex workers the same way that you do any other worker, to provide them the same protection, the same respect, the same responsibilities, the same right to organize, all of the things that any other worker would enjoy. Sex workers deserve that too. And those things, and I think it's also really important to understand that part of the drafting of the New Zealand model came from sex workers themselves. And a lot of people tend to moralize about sex work without knowing anyone who has ever even been involved in it, or only speaking to people, or only talking about people who have had negative experiences. That's not the case with everybody. So I think that, the long answer short, yes, we do support decriminalization under the New Zealand model.
Yeah, I'll just add that the New Zealand model is different than the so-called Nordic model, where the sex work is decriminalized for the sex worker, but the person that pays for the service is violating the law, which of course brings law enforcement into contact with the sex worker. So it really doesn't let consenting adults go about their business. And of course, we're talking about consenting adults, not children, not people that are coerced or trafficked. Stephen Breedlove, I'm running for city council in Chico, California. How do we work around local power brokers?
It's a very good question.
Yeah, and so first of all, you need a power structure analysis. Who are the power brokers? And in most places, it's the real estate industry. I imagine in Chico, there's probably agribusiness involved in the power structure too. And then you got to have a strategy. Well, how do we get a majority of people to defeat the power structure electorally? So you need a long-term plan to build a base, and you need to identify who those people might be, and have a strategy to outreach, to reach those people and get them involved in the Green Party. So that's long term. Now, if you get on the council in Chico, I think what you got to do is, hold your ground. And, when votes come up, then you got a choice, and it may be a compromise because you have no other choice. But hold your ground in the formulation and the discussion, and stay active in the community. Get your party organizing people to put pressure on council and advance your issues. The power structure is there. The question is, how do we restructure the power? Which also involves, one thing I think Greens, we talk about grassroots democracy, but I don't think we talk enough about how to do that at the municipal level. Because right now we have representative government at the municipal level, often small towns. And we have a legacy of direct democracy, the town meeting in New England. And we can extend that to our cities by setting up neighborhood assemblies in the wards of the city, and having those have real power. We've got some participatory budgeting going on, which bodies kind of like that do, but they can have more power than that. They can have jurisdiction in their own community over certain things, and it can be set up so that the members of the council have to answer to those assemblies in a formal way. So I think we need to look at our city charters and reform them, not just for ranked choice voting and proportional representation, but for citizen assemblies, where the people have direct say. They're basically legislative bodies at the grassroots. And it still goes on in New England. And that was the cradle of the American Revolution. And we still haven't realized the full democracy that was implied in that revolution, which was a multi-class revolution. You had the merchants in the north, the planters in the south, but then you had the popular classes of, artisans, mechanics, laborers, and small shopkeepers, who the elites, the planters and the merchants, really didn't want involved in politics, but they forced themselves. Read about Sam Adams in the Boston Town Meeting, and the Committees of Correspondence and the Sons of Liberty. We need that kind of movement today to take on this corporate duopoly.
Ryan Clark asks, what would you do for people like my mother who badly need painkillers but have been put off because of the so-called war on opioids? See Don't Punish Pain movement.
Well, I think we need to, first of all, decriminalize the so-called hard drugs, including opioids. Because on the one hand, people do get painkillers, they get addicted, their prescription runs out, and then they find themselves seeking out heroin in particular on the streets, or underground sources of other opioids. And then they have they're in possession of illicit drugs, they're using illicit drugs, so they don't get medical help because they're afraid they'll be charged with possessing illicit drugs. So what we need to do is like Portugal did back in 2001. They decriminalized the hard drugs. So if you're in possession of drugs for personal use, you don't get a criminal charge, you get an appearance ticket, and you meet with a doctor, a social worker, and a lawyer. And they look at your situation to see how they can help. Do you need drug treatment? Do you need a job? Do you need counseling because you're using the drugs to cope with other problems? Whatever it is. And as a result of that program, they don't have overdoses, deaths from overdoses. HIV is not spreading. Street-related drug crime is radically reduced to virtually nothing. And actually less people now use hard drugs than they did when this program started. So that's one side. And because the fear of addiction and the criminal liability of using illicit painkillers, doctors then become reluctant to prescribe it to people who need it. And, when we talk about Medicare for all, and that would include not just free, medical treatments, it would include the drugs that are prescribed. And so in that kind of situation, I think your mother would have access to painkillers that, apparently she needs. And it would be, she would get them through the medical system. So, we know they was good quality, not something somebody may get off the streets. And, for example, in the heroin, there's a lot of fentanyl in it, which can kill you real quick. So I think Medicare for all and decriminalize hard drugs are two steps we need to take so people can deal with their pain without, getting in a situation where they may end up in trouble with the law.
And like that question just made me think of, a situation with my mother. My mother had cancer. And just dealing with bureaucracy simply because she needed meds and did not want to be accused of med seeking, but was in chronic pain. So your question really resonated with me. Tim Anderson is asking again, what will you do to address racism and hate crimes against Asian Americans? Considering the spike in discrimination and violent attacks against Asians blamed for COVID-19 and Trump calling it the China virus. Well, I mean, correcting the individual currently occupying the White House, there's no correcting him. I mean, I think it's something that people understand is that this individual takes a lot of joy in punching down, scapegoating people. And I think that we need to work very hard in this country to address the fact that, you know, we need to not be swayed by that kind of scapegoating. Too many people have bought into that. And I mean, I think that just speaks to the culture of this country, period. But that's a whole nother story. As far as what our administration would do to address hate crimes against Asian Americans is making sure that legislation is in place that puts stiff penalties on people who get involved with hate crimes. I mean, we're talking also, you know, one of the things that we've written about is hate crimes against, you know, transgender people and non-binary people. So, I mean, when we're talking about hate crime legislation, we're talking about stiffening it, you know, putting teeth in it all the way around so that people who are victims of hate crimes get justice. And people who perpetrate hate crimes don't walk for that. They don't get a slap on the wrist and, you know, free to do that again. We would prosecute those things. Howie?
Yeah, this is a personal issue because I have a set of cousins, and they, you know, between their family and the families they married into, I got dozens of cousins who are Asian and Pacific Islanders in Hawaii. And, you know, Dave told me lots of stories. I came up in the 50s in California when the Japanese, some of them coming back to my neighborhood, had come out of internment camps. And the white people were still viciously discriminated against them. There was an N-word for Japanese. I mean, it was so bad that Japanese were recruited into the Black Panther Party in Seattle and Oakland. So I've seen that reality, and it seems to have gone away, but it's come back with a vengeance with Donald Trump. It's not the China virus, it's the Trump virus. He's the guy responsible for how much it spread. And so the scapegoating of Asians, and that goes with the immigrant bashing, which, you know, he targeted at first Mexicans, but we know from some of the reporting that, you know, the Steve Bannons and Stephen Millers of the world, you know, didn't want the Asians coming in here either. They're just stone cold racists. And so, you know, we got to get them out of power. There are discrimination, anti-discrimination and civil rights laws, as well as hate crimes laws that are not being enforced, particularly under this Justice Department. So it requires a new tone from the top, and not a blaming as Trump always does. He blames somebody else for his problems. And he likes to blame China a lot. And unfortunately, too many people listen to that. And, you know, we've seen incidents, you know, on the street, on these videos that go viral of people harassing Asian people over COVID. And that comes from the top. So that's got to change. And so that's how I would respond to that. Brandon Rilling, what are your views on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
We support Palestine. We support Palestine's right to self-determination. We do not agree with Israel and its aggression against the Palestinian people. And it's not something we support. We do support BDS. And, you know, basically in a nutshell, we support the right to self-determination and not having to live under an apartheid state. I mean, if you look at South Africa, like how it references a lot in the 80s, which I remember, this is the way folks are being treated, and it's not all right. So we support the right of Palestinians to, you know, their self-determination, to have their homeland, and to not be the subjects of aggression from the Israelis.
Yeah, I think, the U.S. should stop giving a blank check to everything Israel does, seizing land in the occupied territories, changing the status of Palestinians within their citizenship status within Israel last year. We support equal civil and political rights for everybody living in the Israeli-Palestinian area. Now, whether the ultimate solution is a two-state or a one-state solution, that is up to them. And the role of the United States should be to facilitate that instead of being giving Israel a blank check. No matter what they do, we support them. And obviously Trump does that, but we have to remember Joe Biden said, well, I oppose Netanyahu annexing these settlements on the West Bank. And then he added, but if they do it, I'm not going to do anything. That just gives a green light to the, Likud government, the right-wing Israeli government, to do whatever the hell they want. It wasn't always that way. I mean, back in the Reagan administration, at one point there were settlements coming up, and they told them, no, if you do the settlements, you're not getting aid. Israelis backed off. Go back to Eisenhower, when the French and the Israelis and the British were trying to seize the Suez Canal from Egypt. Eisenhower told them, you do that and you're no longer our allies, no longer expect military support from us. And those three countries backed off right away. So, we haven't always been given a blank check to Israel. As far as BDS goes, the National Palestinian BDS Committee is asking that the first sanctions be military. And now's the time to do that. Because Israel is very active militarily in Gaza, the West Bank, Syria, and we got to stop supporting that. So the U.S. should be a neutral broker and help both sides, not give a blank check to one side, because that's just making the situation worse. And that's a powder keg that's could ignite the whole Middle East. So it's an important issue, and the U.S. has had a stupid policy for a long time.
Brian Egan, and if it's Egan, forgive me. Angela, you worked 14 years as a bus driver. You must have seen a lot of regulars and a lot of people come and go. Is there anyone who comes to mind, specifically someone who rode your bus, without mentioning their name, of course, that you think of when you're fighting, when you think about the people that you're fighting for by running for VP? Could you maybe describe them? Well, a lot of those years that I drove a bus, I was a school bus driver. I mean, I had, I drove for Greyhound for 2 years, Milwaukee County Transit for 4 years. There were so many people, I could mention just off the top of my head. Just thinking about a trip on Greyhound where we had a crying baby, a very young mama, new mama, didn't have anything that he needed. She didn't know. I mean, and she's traveling with this baby by herself. And I'm pulled over on the Jersey Turnpike, and I'm out of my seat walking up and down the aisle rocking this baby. And a lady sitting in the seat said, I got 6 grandkids, Mom, give them to me. The whole bus ended up being baby Michael's grandparent the whole way down. We were buying him diapers, buying him food. And so when I think about people that I'm fighting for, these are people, this is it. I mean, folks who are in the same boat that I am and that Howie's in. These are working people. These are people who are not, and this is policy, sweetheart. It is policy. People who are working class folks, people who, didn't come from money, people who don't know what, may be facing housing instability or things like that. These are the people that we fight for. And it was an honor to be driving for them.
Jared Still asking, because I'm curious, how do you feel that the military is one of the few ways for American civilians to financially set in this country? And I guess that means, get financially set. And, I think it's wrong because we don't have a formal draft, we have an economic draft. And the surveys show that most people join the military to get training and for the benefits they get with whatever the GI Bill is at the time. And a lot of these people don't have another alternative. And it shouldn't be that way. People should be able to choose occupations they want to go into. And so we have a job guarantee in our Economic Bill of Rights where people who can't find a living wage job in the private sector can go to the employment office, not the unemployment office, and say, I want my job. And it would be in social services or in public works, infrastructure, and, get a good paying job. And, when you go there, you would have, skills they would match what you bring and what you're interested in to the jobs available. I think it's a lot better than having people come out of high school with dim prospects for employment, college, an option that would, throw them into debt. And they may be from a family that can't afford that. They need to start making money right away. So the military becomes the option, not because they want to really be a soldier or a Marine or a sailor, but because they need the economic benefits. And, so I don't feel good about that being their option.
It also makes me think of places, I'm thinking of rural Wisconsin, a lot of towns in rural Wisconsin, where it's either the military or the prison. That, those are your two choices as a young person in those areas for work. And I think it's exactly right. It's a form of economic coercion where people these are the only two options that they have. And this isn't necessarily something that they want to do, but this is all there is. And no one should have to do that.
S110. What is your solution to address the homeless crisis in the U.S.? Well, I'll start with that. We got to build affordable housing to put the homeless into. And we want to do that through public housing. Our Eco-Socialist Green New Deal will build 25 million new units of public housing. We're going to do it the right way, not as segregated housing in the worst part of town for poor people of color, but housing that's open to everybody, professionals, middle-income, working-class people, as well as low-income people. And we say 25 million units because we need about 10 million units for low-income people that don't have access to affordable housing as defined by the federal standard of 30% of income. I mean, right now, half the people pay over 25% of their income for housing, and a quarter of the people pay over 50%. And the rent is too damn high all over. So that's why we want to build this program out. It's also a good energy program because we're going to build housing that is powered by clean energy. It's a good jobs program. It's a desegregation program. And by linking it up with public planning to rebuilding mass transit, we can transform communities into being walkable communities where people can get to, shopping and cultural amenities and work walking because it's close at hand. They're compact, diverse communities, which has a lot to say for it in terms of social and environmental justice and sanity.
Lucre announcer, hey, won't building all that housing cause a huge amount of emissions? No. And Howie just basically outlined the fact that building materials would be built or used in an ecologically sound way. If you want to expand on that, Howie.
Yeah, well, the Green New Deal proposes to transform all of our productive systems, not just the energy we produce, but manufacturing, transportation, buildings, and agriculture to zero to negative emissions by 2030. So you would use electric power to, cut and assemble buildings, and that would be powered by clean energy. Now, of course, during the transition period, we'll still be using fossil fuels, but that'll be ramping down very quickly. So, and then once that housing's there, it's going to be well built and up there for a long time and powered by clean energy. So it will reduce emissions. For example, they won't heat, cool, and cook with gas. They will heat and cool with heat pumps and cook with induction stoves. So that's the new technology we got to institute across the board. And I would add the heavy machinery. People say, oh, you got to have diesel to run that. You know what diesel does in a locomotive? It creates electricity in a generator to power an electric motor. You can get more torque and power from electric motors than you can from combustion engines. So put that one to rest. When they built the Northern Pacific Railroad through the Rockies, they realized they couldn't do it with diesel. So they set up electric trains through the steepest parts. And they used hydropower and, like trolleys in the cities to drive those electric locomotives up those steep slopes. That was done 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago. So this technology's around. We can't be subjects of the fossil fuel industry. And that's a huge issue that the Biden platform does not address. They basically want to frack the hell out of the country and then power stuff with natural gas. And then they say, well, we're going to capture and sequester that carbon, which is not economically viable unless the federal government is subsidizing those demonstration projects, which means it's more expensive. I mean, it's dumb as can be, but that's what we got. Trump calls climate change a hoax, but Biden acts as if it's a hoax. I mean, we're in big trouble on the climate. We have, we had the International Panel on Climate Change report said we have 420 gigatons of carbon left to release before we go past the threshold that'll get us above a 1.5 degree Celsius rise in global temperatures. And we've been emitting 42 tons a year. That's 10% a year. So that came out in 2018, 2019, 2020. We got 8 years, maybe 7, because it was all 2018, 2019. We're almost through 2020. 7 or 8 years to get, and we exhaust the carbon budget. And here we got the Democrats, the lesser evil, proposing to expand our dependence on fossil fuels, not to mention oil, which they also frack for. And while they promote more electric cars, they don't phase out combustion engines. I forget the date, but it's, too far in the future to matter. So, we need to vote for the Greens at least to lay down, our demands, and then we got to continue after the election.
Donna Ledbetter, question. What about the student loan crisis? Do you have a solution for this?
Sure. We want to reduce student loan debt. And, I proposed that we do it. You pay 10% of your income above poverty for a maximum of 20 years for the debt you've incurred. And that would be retroactive. So a lot of people would have a lot of their debt reduced. Any interest that the federal government's collecting, which has 92% of the loans, would be eliminated, because the point is not to make money off student debt, is to get students through college. And then after 20 years, whatever you owed is forgiven. And if you've been, paying a while, you may have a radical reduction because we'll deduct that from your loans. And I prefer that to then just wiping out student loan debt, which is 1.6 trillion, because, that would be eaten by the federal government. And under the tax structure we have right now, working people are paying higher taxes on their labor income than capitalists are on their capital income. So, I don't think we should, the burden's got to be shared, because, working people are going to pay for the debt that's forgiven. So that's my proposal. And I think that makes it affordable for people who have gone into debt. And then going forward, we want tuition-free public college. But if you go to Harvard or another private school and you incur debt to go there, you should have an affordable way of borrowing and paying back, and that would be 10% of your income above poverty for 20 years, and that would be the maximum with no interest. And so if you're a Harvard grad and you go to Goldman Sachs, you're probably going to be able to pay it all off because you're going to make so much money. If you go to Meharry and get a medical degree and then, get involved in a community health center with a modest salary, you may not pay it all back, but you're paying society back by the medical services you're delivering. So, or if like me, you go into construction and didn't know that you're going to have stagnant wages for the next 50 years, so you don't have as much income, then you'd have some student debt relieved.
All right, I don't see anything new popping up. So I think our boss is calling it. Yeah.
So, okay, well, I hadn't collected any final thoughts, but I would say, what I'm thinking of is how serious the crises we face are. COVID, obviously. The latest projection from the epidemiologists at the University of Washington are more than double the deaths we've already had by the end of the year, over 400,000. And that's if we maintain what social distancing and mask wearing we're doing. If that's released or lessened, they said it could go as high as 600,000 by the end of the year. This is crazy. And like I've said, the two governing parties are presiding over a failed state. We know Trump is a loser. COVID won. But Biden, is really not pointing in a clear direction. He's got the platform now. Should be pounding away on Trump and on Congress, who's been on vacation. They just got back after a month on vacation while people are losing their benefits and having, a terrible time. And actually giving Trump the opportunity to say, well, we're going to do a moratorium on evictions. But of course, when that moratorium ends, the rent's still due and people are not going to be able to afford it. And meanwhile, the small landlords and all the small businesses that depend on, property services and property management are having a hard time. This is really no relief. And, the Democrats, I keep thinking back in the spring when Nancy Pelosi showed her freezers full of ice cream when they're on another vacation and how she was hanging out during the lockdown. How did that make the people feel that were, worrying about paying the rent, getting food, going to the doctor? It's just incredible. So there's COVID. I mentioned climate. This inequality we've been talking about that has lowered working class life expectancies in recent years. That's getting worse in this COVID crisis. The big businesses, the tech companies, their stocks are soaring, and a lot of people are, struggling. And so that's become worse. And then we got the nuclear arms race. So I guess that's to say, we need to persist and stay active. And in this campaign, let's maximize our vote and lay down some markers for what we demand. And then whoever's in, they're going to hear our demands in other ways. And so those are my last thoughts. Angela, you have anything?
Just if people did not see their question get answered, I think that folks should visit the website. We're at www.howiehawkins.us. There are whole policy papers on things that we're speaking about here and questions that we've answered, and maybe you didn't hear, happening tonight or whatever. Visit the website, and that way you have time to go through the website, check out the policy papers, policies and perspectives. I mean, when I tell you this man is a living encyclopedia, I promise you, this is one of the reasons Howie Hawkins could ask me to come out of total not dealing with electoral politics, and I would do it because the man is brilliant. So, if you didn't get your question answered, I invite everyone to go to the website and, you know, check out the policy papers and things like that, because, you know, deep dives into our policies are there, and you can peruse them, because sometimes we get questions, you know, if it's a question we've gotten a lot, it might not be given to us. So it isn't that we're, you know, folks are ignoring it, but there's also an answer to it on the website as well. And my final thought for y'all, coming from, you know, Dita, who's a bit more active tonight than she's been, y'all take care of yourselves. There's still a pandemic. There's still a whole lot going on. You just make sure you take care of yourselves and those you love and those around you if you can.
All right, good night and be safe out there.